The markets are closely watching the race for the White House, almost as closely as Joe with this countdown. For more on the proposed policies and how they will impact the economy, let's bring in our next guest, Libby Cantrill, head of U.S. Public Policy at PIMCO. Libby, it's great to see you again.
Great to see you. Not
to jump too far ahead, but as people are, and the poly market odds have tightened now a little bit again between Trump and Harris. If she pulls this off, we were just speaking last hour with Axios. If she has Congress, there's some people who are focusing now on what would full Democratic control of the levers of power, so to speak, mean for policy. Could it actually be substantially to the left of this current sort of consensus idea that we might effectively have gridlock because everything's going to be so close?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I think that the numbers, however, are going to be very difficult, even if Harris does win and she does take sort of Congress with her. Of course, Republicans now control the House by just 4 seats. If Democrats flip the House, it is going to be by a similarly narrow margin. And what we've seen is that when you don't really have a very large cushion in terms of votes, it is really difficult to govern. On the Senate side, I think that's even being more narrow. Should Democrats somehow keep the Senate, and I think we still believe that odds favor Republicans taking back the Senate. Democrats have a very bad Senate map, as you probably talked about.
No.
So even if they have maybe a majority in name, sort of functionally, it is going to be a very small majority, and that's going to have a practical limitation in terms of what can get done.
We grasp at straws to find market-moving election Trump trade. Oh, this is moving. And it's probably, at best, tenuous. But I really do believe if that became in the market that it was going to be a Democratic sweep, I do not think the market would be going up.
I think there would be concerns, right? But, and this is what we have guided our clients to, is just that the numbers matter. And if you have a 50-50 Senate, Joe, as you know, I mean, you just can't functionally get a lot done.
Well, taxing unrealized gains is a heavy lift, number one.
Taxing on unrealized gains is just, I mean, if you just look at the standalone bill that's been introduced by Senator Wyden, it has 10 co-sponsors. I mean, this is not a popular bill. This did not get out of committee. This does not have the support, not only of the full Senate, but of even the full Democratic caucus.
Could you see capital gains at 44.6%?
I would say we have seen Democrats run on that platform, and we have not seen any changes. I think it is going to be very hard, especially just given those narrow margins. I mean, if we were talking about a 60-40 Democratic Senate, then maybe. But if we're talking about a 50-50 Senate, which is the best night, this is the thing, that is the best night for Democrats. It would be a 50-50
Do you think
Senate.
Either the stock market or the the underlying business sentiment would change if capital gains were taxed at 44.6%?
I mean, I think that
I'm just wondering. I don't know. There's people that argue that it doesn't matter whether.
I mean, look, there would be some sort of income threshold. I mean, I think her plan is
right. No, I know.
$1 million, yeah, what have you. Yeah, I mean, I think that what we know about taxation is it does actually inform behavior. So anyway, I think, but the reality here is that even if there were a Democratic wave in quotes, it would be by the smallest margins. I can't sort of reinforce this enough. A 50-50 Senate is just not going to lead to massive changes in the tax code.
Why couldn't it be 51? You mentioned the tough map, and I know there's been a lot of focus on this, but even with, let's just say, hypothetically, she wins the top of the ticket, but you think Republicans still, because of these particular states and this particular map, they could still...
Yeah, so right now it's only 51-49, as you know, Democrats to Republicans. The West Virginia seat is lost. Joe Manchin is stepping down, as everybody knows. That will go Republican. So then that is 50-50. Now, is there a world where Democrats can win the Texas seat and the Florida seat? Hypothetically, but that is a world where we would have to see more of a landslide election, and none of the indicators are pointing to that. If you look at things like the generic ballot, or if you look at enthusiasm levels, despite all of the sort of the good vibes for Harris, and she definitely has stuck the landing over the last few days, all of those are pointing to an incredibly close race. Not only at the top of the ballot, top of the ticket, but also for these down ballot.
So what are the chances that Trump would get his way on tariffs then? What would he need?
Yeah, so this is, I think, the difference, though, and it's a great point, because tariffs, technically it's our fiscal policy, right? Just a fancy way of saying, taxes or what have you. Tariffs do not have to go through the Congress.
He could just do it.
He can just do that unilaterally. What we saw from the tariffs on China, this 10% baseline tariff, there's a lot of kind of legal scholars who are debating whether he has jurisdiction over that. But, I think he probably would try to do that. So he does not need the legislative body. He does not need a cooperative Congress in terms of that. He doesn't need a cooperative Congress in terms of sort of informing some of his immigration policies either. So there are things that the president can do to move the economy. It doesn't go through Congress, but capital gains increases, that goes through Congress. And again, this is where not only do the majorities matter, but the margins of the majorities matter.
Your job, what we've talked about, is 10% of what you need to look at. I mean, the regulatory executive order differences between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. There must be a million things to think about in different parts of the market and different parts of, I mean,
where we've seen
clean energy, transition, net
energy
zero.
Is actually the area where we've actually seen the biggest differences in terms of executive orders between a Trump and a Biden. And the border, although, of course, Biden sort of has pivoted his border policy and now is effectively, slow.
He could do it now. He could close it now and doesn't do it.
I mean, but if you look actually at the number of border crossings, Joe, as I'm sure you have, it has decreased.
Well, we got to ingest the 15 million that are already here. So.
But now it's all retroactively about the immigration bill that wasn't passed.
But one thing I think actually
would let in millions anyway. That was a bad bill.
On the regulatory side, though, it's kind of the market is looking at what a Harris administration could portend. It's really important, again, to remember that 50-50, the best that they can do is 50-50. Again, we still think odds favor a Republican Senate. That means that anybody who's going to be nominated for the SEC, for the FTC, for the FDIC, alphabet soup, will have to go through maybe a Republican Senate. And that will likely put some guardrails in terms of who she can actually put into those positions.